This is a show where the spirit has control. Straight talk, no chaser. So listen up close, get the medicine for your soul. Straight talk, no chaser. Telling you the truth is what we here to do. Straight talk, no chaser. Come get all the blessings God got for you.
Welcome to Straight Talk No Chaser. I'm the host, Pastor Marcus Bakar. Today, we're going to tackle an issue that has been near and dear to me, but the issue I have found myself when trying to do it on my own, I couldn't quite make it work. So I brought in two experts, two bright young men, two young men brighter than myself that are going to help us chop it up and discuss and see what's really going on and how we can begin the conversation. Today, we're going to tackle the big word called racism. That word, which has become a big and bigger issue. We kept saying we passed it. We kept saying that we have outgrown it. But as we've seen the past few months, it's still very much prevalent in our communities. So today, I want to introduce to you Chris Miller. Chris, for the past 20 years, has been compassionately supporting organizations in reducing the gap between its stated desire of justice, equality, and inclusion, and its operations reality. He has a BA in social work from Purdue University and an MBA from Boston. In his free time, Chris, he's a hiker. He likes to go hiking and camping. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Also, you've seen him before here with me. Very, very, very bright young man. He is the pastor of Unity Christian Center. I messed that up, Pastor Holley. He attended the seminary at Covington School of Theology in North Carolina, School of Theology and Higher Place Christian University. Sebastian received his AA in Biblical Studies, BA in Theology, and a Master's of Divinity and PhD in Christian Counseling. Pastor Sebastian Holley is also a certified John Maxwell Leadership Team member. He is an entrepreneur, best-selling author. He's a thought provoker, as I like to call him. Welcome back to the show, Pastor Holley.
Thank you, great man.
Well, guys, thank you both for joining us here. I'll make my announcements at the end that I said I was going to make. So I try to follow the layout I give you, but you never know what's going to happen. So stay with me. But guys, this issue of racism has really just seemed to have blown up again. We thought we were dealing with it, and we thought things was what we thought was coming down, when in actuality, to me, it was overt racism that was taking place. But now it's all coming to the forefront again. So let's jump right in real quick. Anybody? Well, first, let me start with you guys. I want you guys to define this for me. I'll start with you, Chris. What would you call racism? What's the definition of racism?
The definition that I work from is prejudice plus the power to make laws and rules to enforce your bias. So it's privilege and power and bias all coming together. Most everybody can be prejudiced, and yet white people have more opportunity to make law based on their beliefs. So racism is bias plus power.
I like that definition.
Short version.
Okay. Pastor Holley.
I would agree with Brother Chris. The only thing that I would add is that by definition, a black person can't be racist. We do have preference, and then even our prejudice is a response. It's not necessarily something that we initiate, but something that we're responding to or responding in. So I definitely agree with this definition of racism.
You know, a lot of people are going to look back and say, he said black people can't be racist. How can you elaborate on that for me?
When you look up the actual definition for the word racism, the primary means in which we are racist is by superiority, right? And that's the difference maker there. We're not the dominant culture or the superior culture.
That's the term I wanted you to get back to, was superiority, because that was the term that that really caught my eye last time you and I spoke. Now, Chris, as you in your profession, well, tell people. I read what you do, but tell people, break it down for them in the simplest form. What you do, or
Right.
what you've done, because you've also retired too. So,
I'm
thanks
trying
for
to be
spending time with
retired.
me.
Yeah. Well, for the last 20, 30 years, I have been working with primarily white organizations to have white organizations understand that we have a racial identity, that we have racial preferences, that we implement them, we act on them, most often outside of our awareness, that have negative impacts, particularly on people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And having us understand how we're doing that has been the work that I've been doing.
That's
Okay.
good.
Now, do you get, when they bring you in, I'm pretty sure you don't have everybody that buys in. Is it mainly the males or the females that don't buy in?
It's often the men that don't show up in large quantity because it's a group, right? And so us men, have our things about how we like to be in communication and relation to other people. So, and also most of my clients are nonprofits, so they have a lot of female employees. And one of the things that has been very important to me in my work is to actually insist that the male leadership participate in this work.
You insist that they participate.
I do. If you're going to hire me, that has to be part of your agreement. Because what I've found is if the white men at the top don't buy into this, this work is really hard. It unsettles people and organizations, and they shut it down. Whereas if they're in there struggling along with it and they see both the progress and the difficulty of it, they're much more likely to stay with it.
Pastor Holley,
Mm-hmm.
going with what he was saying, because I know you being a Maxwell leader, a speaker, have you ran into that racism when you go out to speak?
I can't say specifically I ran necessarily into outright racism or been confronted with racism, but more indirectly, of course, I've done with it. Most people don't understand the systemic level in which we've been conditioned in racism.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that it's not just about the racial moments that we have to confront with a direct interaction. It's the way we've been programmed to think, the conditioning that's there. You can't help but to deal with that. You follow me, until someone becomes attentive or intentional to deal with that or to confront it within their own lives,
Yeah, I don't know if I shared this with you, but I know I shared with Chris. You remember Sears and Roebuck?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
The one that used to be up on Cumberland Mall. I was walking through there one day. I was probably in my early 20s, 21, 22, somewhere in there, maybe 23, walking through, and this little kid sitting in a buggy. I walked around the corner. He said, "Look, Mom, that's a nigger." And so I know when you said that people, we don't intentionally do it, but when you train someone at that young age, they grow up, and it's just something that they grew up with. And
one thing you have to consider is that I'm not saying that the racism doesn't exist. I'm saying that you're not always confronting acts of racism directly, that you're dealing with a more indirect, a more systematic programming that has been conditioned in the majority of the minds. I mean, even being born in the United States of America, you've experienced it without even realizing you've experienced it. You've been literally conditioned and educated to have a programmed response, as it were. Again, superiority is not just a consequence of white America being larger than Black America. There's literally a systemic aspect of this that's been conditioned in all of America. You follow me? And that's really big. Even when you were saying earlier that racism is up and down, it's never been up and down. It's always been a flat reality. The only thing that's happened is the expression of racism is more dominant now, because the leader, the president of the free world, is obviously racist, and those people that support him, and especially those that support him that's within white supremacy or white supremacist organizations, they just feel like they have more of a voice. Even the individuals that have always thought this way, now that this is being supported from the top down, they feel like they have more of a voice, and so they're more boisterous, they're more direct, in having racial activities, that we have to consider. You feel me?
Yeah. With that being, I guess, more prevalent today.
Right.
And I guess I was wrong when I said up and down. It's changed.
Right.
How it's featured has changed. Having grown
Well,
up, because my
think
dad
we,
grew up in a
mhm.
city,
Come on.
Cedartown, Georgia.
Right.
That was a store, but I never knew why my grandfather wouldn't allow us to sit in the store to eat. I didn't realize because I was young. I just knew we could go in and order the food at the counter, but we'd stand back, get our food, and we'd walk out. We never stayed there. And so now it's not so much they don't do that to you anymore, but now it's kind of covered. But how do we break that chain, though? How do we break that?
There's a lot to breaking a chain. Suchan Ra, you guys familiar with Suchan Ra? He's wrote a book, very powerful book. I'm gonna have to look up the name for it while we're talking. Mm-hmm. In some of my books, but one of the things that he's highlighted, and I absolutely agree with, is that you have the layer of racism that exists in a person or an individual, and then you have systemic racism, what has actually been, propagated out of different systems: educational system, governmental system, the judicial systems, religious systems is a very big proponent of racism. You know what I'm saying? That most people don't even realize it, that we've literally programmed a very Anglo, very Eurocentric perspective as the standard of Christianity. Where did we get that? You know what I'm saying? Like, where did this come from? You follow me? But because that is a very sacred part of most people's lives, they don't know how embedded racism is in their thinking, just out of that attitude of superiority. So the systemic part has to be dealt with as first. So if we start talking about solutions, not only is it dealing with the heart of individuals, which I personally believe, I'm a preacher, so I personally believe that authentic relationship with God is the key there to, an individual dealing with racism. But then on the other side of it is there has to be a very intentional move to deal with the systems and what's broken in most of the systems. And that's the part that scares people.
Mm-hmm. Chris.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that because those systems work for us white people better than people of color, we're not aware that they exist, right? It's like being a fish that's in water, right? You're not gasping for air because the environment is working for you.
Come on.
Right? So, yeah, I mean,
real quick,
that's a really hard thing to convey to white people, because I think we've been conditioned to think about the overt acts, where I say, well, I don't call anybody the N-word, or, I got some friends who are black, or they can eat in that restaurant. So that's a way that then we think that we're not participants, right? And because we're beneficiaries, that systemic stuff is going on all the time, and we're unaware of it. I mean, it's one of the costs of our privilege. So I feel like my work is to really always widen that lens.
That's good stuff.
That there is, the systemic component that we participate in, whether we're conscious about it or not.
For those that don't know about Chris is very direct. He's very open when it comes to talking about what he just said. He said something. I'm going to come back now and ask him, because I heard him explain it once. I want him to explain it here. On the last show, I saw him in another podcast. That's how I initially ran into Chris. And then after that, I sent him. It took me a couple of weeks. Then I sent him an email. And then it took me a couple more days before I actually invited him to this setting here, because I wasn't real sure. Because I told you, I told both of you, it was a struggle for me to do this topic, because it could go right and left, and it could stir, I just didn't know how to approach it. But Chris is very straightforward, and so I like that about him, because you said something a few seconds ago about white supremacists or the white privilege. I should say white privilege is what you said. Explain that, because some people don't think it exists. I've heard people say, I don't get no privileges. I've heard people out of people that I associate with mouths. Explain that for some people who may not understand what that truly is, because they're not talking. Most people think you're talking about millionaires and getting tax cuts.
I think you're right. I think that is part of the disconnect for white people, particularly white working class people, right? It's hard when working class white men feel discounted, in their jobs, or the way that they're respected, that it is very difficult for them to think about them having privilege, for sure, right? And so class becomes the variable that white people want to talk about instead of race. So, you know, I mean, it depends on the situation, like how direct you go, how hard you go. But it's really about talking about, when were you followed in a store? How many of your relatives have been in jail? How many, you know, of your friends have been arrested or roughed up in their neighborhood just riding their bike? How much do you get asked to be a representative of your race? You know, can go on and on and on of all the examples of which, you know, I get treated well, you know, all the time. And I'm really aware of that. I feel like why I get treated well is that I think that both women and men and white people and people of color are afraid of what white men's anger can do. And I think that that's a way that us white men don't think about how we're getting, you know, kind of groomed and preferred, because it's baked into all of our interactions.
You said something just now when you said that white men's anger, and you said that they've been groomed. Is that, you think that stems from the origin of this country?
Oh man, do you want me to work in this country again? Good thing I'm retired. Good thing I'm retired.
I can say it. I can say
absolutely,
it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Colonization, manifest destiny, doctrines of discovery, all of these ideas, you know, have conditioned this thinking that most people have, and this reality. You know what? I in one of my books, the name of it is "To Be Real: A Healthy Multiculturalism," and one of the things that we talk about is that whiteness is not a color. You know what I'm saying? Whiteness is literally an idea of superiority, right? Because a big factor of it that most people don't realize is that there is an intent of assimilation that comes with a lot of people, especially even in ministry, that come with a lot of people where the standard is very Eurocentric. And so then in order for me to get through or gain, I have to assimilate. You follow me? The problem with that is there's going to be a lack of authenticity in who that individual is. So he's not bringing his true self to any equation. And so the benefits of relationship are missed, totally missed, practically and spiritually. And so it was, God never intended that, you know what I'm saying? But you have this realization that exists basically because of the conditioning that we've shaped superiority out of.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it's kind of a perverse way of trying to connect with the senior male leaders about, to your point about like not showing up in your full self because you're not allowed to be authentic, right? My thing to them from a business perspective is I'm paying you $1 a day or $1 a minute for whether you show up 50% or 100%. I surely want you to show up 100%, right? I mean, like it robs everybody of, like you're saying, that authenticity, that power that's able to be unleashed with everybody showing up with their full selves.
That's right.
And it's hard to do, right? Because I think that one of the ways that one of many ways that structural racism shows up is most white people live racially segregated lives.
That's right.
Right? So so the ability to have an authentic relationship, one, there's not very many opportunities, and two, the lack of familiarity, I think, you know, just
real.
Yeah.
But the other thing you have to also consider is that the challenge is not beneficial to me.
Yeah.
Why would I take on the challenge? There's no reason in my makeup that I have to take on this challenge.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? In my quote unquote Christianity, I don't need black people. In my employment or the corporate idea that I work in, I don't need black people. Why do I, have to even deal with it? Because it's not beneficial to me at all. As a matter of fact, it's more beneficial for me to continue to support the systems that do make life easy for me.
No, that's real talk. I mean, that's real talk. And so how, it is then my work is how do I understand for myself and talk to other white people that there's a cost to us in our humanity for having racism exist, and that it's too hard for me to do it for you people. Like it can't work from that. I'm going to be some messed up savior. I'm not going to be in an authentic relationship, equal relationship with you. And so for me to learn and for other white people to learn what's the cost of racism to us, that it actually really enhances our life to take on this challenge. You're right. I think, a lot of people say, I don't got a horse in this race.
Right. Another thing that, and this is what, again, becomes a dividing line, why all of my emphasis are centered around authentic relationship with God. Because now when we start talking about the authenticity of our Christianity, then we have to deal with, what causes you to practice a religious consciousness that makes you more racist versus actually having a right relationship with God that frees you from racism. Mm-hmm. So those are huge variables. Mm-hmm. You have a couple of things that you have to consider. Again, my foundation is right relationship with God. You know what I mean? I think, if someone's not in that realm, then all they're left to deal with is their guilt. You know what I'm saying? And if they never feel guilty about, the traumas that have been enacted on a culture or people, then we have nothing to start with. We have no place to be able to really deal with this. But when we're, dealing with or coming from a foundation of quote unquote Christianity or right relationship with God, as I mostly say or use, the dynamics of this, you have three different perspectives. Well, let me say this. First of all, and I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time, but first of all, most people's consciousness about racism is wrong, right? So most people, when you bring up racism, their thought is hate. Their whole mind says, well, I've never been taught to hate anyone. I don't use derogatory terms to describe anyone. I don't participate in these type of jokes or anything like that. So I'm not racist. Mm-hmm. That's their immediate response. But the reality of it is the vast majority of racism has nothing to do with hate or being taught to hate. It has everything to do with fear. And most everyone has been taught or conditioned in a mindset of fear. Even my people are from people that love them. They've dealt with, don't deal with black people because, and the rest of it is a plethora of ideas that you should fear, that you should inherently, basically what begins to take place, inherently you think about black people this way because you've been taught your entire life, right, to fear, right? And that's heavy. As a matter of fact, it's so powerful that we were at a diversity setting, and we was doing one of the diversity practices. And I guess it's about 100 people in this particular setting, almost 50% black, 50% white, well, probably more, 50% white and maybe 45% black. And then we have some Hispanics and Asians in the group as well, right? And then you probably do this very same exercise. And one of the things that they told us to do was write on a piece of paper all of the things that we were taught from our grandparents or by our grandparents about race. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the room was told to do the exact same thing. And then we were told to stick them on the wall, right? And so after everyone had finished, we put on the wall, then everyone came to this same wall and started just perusing the wall and looking at what was written. Almost instantaneously, you could tell which things were written by black people and which things were written by white people. Right? And you know how you can tell it? Because all of the hardest thing that a black person was taught from his grandparents was don't trust white people. That's the hardest thing. It was nothing derogatory, nothing, that was critical, overly critical or whatever, just simply don't trust white people. Now on the other side with the white people, the things they were taught was black people are lazy, they steal, they're sexually perverted, all these other things that was just blast, like blast, what I'm saying? Like real talk. And then you think about, this is why this fear is so conditioned, right? Because what they're being sold is an idea that this negativity exists in the 100% of black people, when the reality of it, if any of it is true, only exists for about 5 to 10% the whole of black people, you know what I'm saying? Which on the flip side of it, we start thinking about these same realities in white people. They exist on a 20, 35%, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, wow, you know. But this one young lady, one white young lady, or which we're absolutely close to now, we started developing a relationship after this moment, was overwhelmed. She literally just broke down and started crying because almost immediately in herself, she could see the difference, you know, in what's actually being conditioned and taught. But back to the point, when you think about racism, I don't think that it's healthy to just think about if I have or have not been taught, you know, hate. You know what I'm saying? I think you have to deal with the layers of superiority that you've been conditioned in and taught, right? And then you also have to think about what part does fear play in my personal makeup of dealing with this. So now you talk about two things that can only be dealt with the relationship with God. You know what I'm saying? You think about fear is not supposed to be a part of our equation in relationship with God. And another one is superiority and love cannot coexist. They cannot cooperate. You know, so when you start talking about a heart that's supposed to be prioritizing toward God, neither of these two dynamics are supposed to exist. And that becomes a healthy place to actually deal with people as it relates to relations, as it relates to racism. I'm gonna stop right there because I get to going to go.
All that, I feel you on that. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in terms of the emotions. I think that the first layer that's behind us, white people, is fear. Mm-hmm. And yet because of that systemic racism and superiority, it comes as anger.
That's right.
Right. And distancing and discounting. And so it takes some time for us white people to slow down and get that it actually is fear.
That's right.
And what are our fears and how do we update our scripts about, in 2020, my relationship with Marcus or Sebastian is not what I got told at 3, mm-hmm. 5, 7, 9 in, you know, and so I think that that's the next layer. And then you saying about that woman crying, I think that that's actually then, if we can sit with our fear and slow down, it's actually, usually we get to sadness.
That's right. Emotion.
It is a tragedy.
That's right. And then your relationships with your friends and family is another level of emotional responses. Yeah. I mean, I've seen it so much, it's just crazy at this point.
Yeah, sure. When the first riots took place, well, I would say protests that turned into riots took place the first, but back, in June, a young man approached me 3-4 days later. He said, you know, I've had to go back and rethink a lot of things because he didn't understand the condition or the things that as Black men we had to suffer, because I had to have conversations with my young men about how to act and how to do X, Y, and Z. He never understood that until this moment. And you're right, it went to, man, he came back and apologized too. Don't apologize. We can grow from this moment. But his whole thing was, I never knew. That's, he kept saying, I never knew. And so that sparked a whole nother conversation about the church. Mm-hmm. And as I've told you before, that Sunday day, that tomorrow is the most discriminating day of the week. Mm-hmm. And only because we've decided to go into our own individual cubbies, I call them cubby holes, and worship. And that's when he began to ask, because he's a white guy, began to ask, how does the church exist? How does the church do this? If God is love, why do we keep having separate churches? Why can't we ever come fellowship at your church? I'm like, you can always come to my church. I don't have a stipulation on the window. I don't have something at the door keeping you out.
Blacks only.
so it was like, won't you just come on by? You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for a special event. Yeah, I might have a special service one day, but come by without that, because I want to talk to you anyway. And I can't talk during special events, but I can always chit chat after during a normal service. But that to him was eye-opening to him. He was just, dude, I didn't know. And I'm wondering how many these type of conversations we're having here. Why don't white people or any people of different races want to sit down at the table now and talk?
This is a show where the spirit has control. Straight up, no chaser. So listen up close, get the medicine for your soul. Straight up, no chaser. Telling you the truth before we hit the truth. Straight up, no chaser. Come get all the blessings God got for you.